talk of the session is telling the story of climate sustainability and modern computing to the general public. A very interesting title. I have looked at some of the videos that are probably going to be presented as a part of this talk, and I am really excited about it. And this talk will be presented by three people. So first one is Soroya Rowley. I hope I pronounced it right. He has been practicing applied theater in San Diego since 2008 and was a co-founder of the theater company Circle that produced regional community-based theater between 2011 and 2020. Rowley earned a master's degree in peace and justice studies and is now teaching at the UCSD and the Old Globe Theater. The second speaker is George Porter. He is an assistant professor in the Systems and Networking Group in the Department of Computer Science and Engineering at UCSD. Finally, we have Monica Stuff. She is an associate professor in the Department of Theater, where she teaches courses in theater and performance studies and is involved in the production both as a director and dramaturg. Oh, okay. Her specialization include popular culture, theater, historiography, writing, as well as culture, gender, and performance theory. Really looking forward to the talk, and George or Soroya, you can.
So this is thank you very much for that introduction. This is interdisciplinary and collaborative work. So this talk will also be collaborative as well. So we're going to all be giving it. Hopefully you can see the slides okay. So as you've seen throughout the day, climate change is a major challenge of our time. This is some data from UC San Diego's Scripps Institute of Oceanography showing this relationship between carbon and environmental temperature. And in fact, May of 2022 was the highest concentration of carbon detected as part of this program. One theme that's really been going on throughout today is the fact that the tech world and computing in general have a role to play when it comes to this challenge. And we've seen that in some of the talks through the devices, the computers, the smartphone, the servers, the so-called embodied carbon load of our field. But we've also seen this in the form of cloud-hosted applications, internet applications, et cetera. So this is this operational carbon component. It's not just a large problem, it's a growing problem. And again, this is a theme you've seen. On the left, you've got some data from the Scooped et al. Paper looking at both kind of pessimistic and optimistic projections of information technologies' impact on the environment. And on the right, you see some sustainability information from Google that's really talking about renewable adoption. But if you look at the y-axis, you can see the scale of energy that we're talking about for these applications measured in terawatt hours. All of these different companies have made a variety of pledges and roadmaps. You've seen this carbon-free energy by 2030 pledge by Google. Microsoft pledges to be carbon negative by 2030. Facebook has a net zero commitment, et cetera. And these are really good and really promising avenues, but they're very much top down. And so one of the things that we're interested in is understanding how to connect with the practitioners, the researchers, and ultimately the users and the general public to kind of translate those top-down goals into reality. So this is this question of how, therefore, might we better connect the aims with action. Now, this practice of connecting scientific knowledge with the general public is certainly not new, and there are famous public figures who focus on science and communication, Carl Sagan here, Neil deGrasse Tyson, raising awareness for things like the cosmos, astronomy, and the universe. When we look at technology, we tend to see people coming from industry. So Bill Gates, people like Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, et cetera. And so there's sort of a split here between kind of the science side and who is the public face of this technology component. There are organizations that have focused on the field of science communication, and we've seen here some notable examples like the Alan Alda Center for Communicating Science and the AAAS, American Association for the Advancement of Science, for things like raising awareness of the the cosmos, physics, other science broadly speaking. And so there's a lot of success that you can draw from here in general. But now I'm going to turn it over to Monica about the next component.
So when you add the environment into the mix, there are some very particular challenges, and there's a whole subfield in science communication in which climate change communication scientists and scholars, such as the Yale program on climate change communication, are identifying some effective communication strategies and tactics. So our project is making use of those strategies and tactics with a particular focus on the general public. As you can see from the Yale climate opinion maps, the general public is largely aware that there is a problem. The majority of people are worried about global warming, think it's causing harm, and are really concerned about how it will cause harm in the future. Being aware that there is a problem and just how big that problem is has led increasingly to what many are calling climate grief. Psychologists and researchers in a variety of fields have started to use this term to refer to this widespread, pervasive feeling of sadness, loss, and anxiety, which is caused by the scale and scope of the climate crisis. And ever since climate scientists began sounding the alarm, there have been people who refuse to acknowledge that there's a problem. This actually isn't counter to climate grief. It can be instead understood as the first stage of grief. There are other stages: anger, bargaining, depression. We ultimately don't want people to get stuck there. The best practices drawn from climate change communication help people get to acceptance, because it's only from this stage that effective action is possible. So this is why we take a solutions-based approach. Climate change communicators like Richard Alley argue that you can't just talk about climate problems, you have to include good news too. Problems are much easier to accept when you also have potential solutions. And of course, the solutions have to take into account that the impact of climate change isn't uniform worldwide, just as modern computing isn't equally distributed throughout the world. So as we're identifying solutions, we need a diverse representations of participants, concerns, and contributions. As James Engel has argued, a response to the climate crisis requires an unprecedented coordination of science, politics, international relations, culture, technology, the arts, religious stewardship, and education, which is why we think interdisciplinary collaborations are vital for this work. Our particular team is a coordination of science, technology, the arts, and education. And we're going to be talking about our summer 2021 project, which was jointly funded by myself and our computer scientists. And our goal during the summer was to use those best practices from science communication to create materials about the environmental impacts of modern computing. We created 2 films, 2 supporting educational videos, as well as a guidebook. And the guidebook is a really important component of the project, because one of our main goals is not just to share the products we are creating, but a process for doing this kind of work. We want to facilitate more and more stories getting told. So to do that, our guidebook has a science section. We worked very closely with the computer scientists to curate the information, to contextualize the issue and quantify the environmental issues of modern computing with a focus on accessibility. And we were going for accuracy as well as what was evocative and would be good source material for stories. Most people have some sort of direct and daily relationship to devices. So we wanted to leverage that using language like "we tend to replace our outdated phones" as a way of using shared experience to make connections to the wider problem. 75% of cell phones ending up in a drawer when they're discarded, only 15% of the material is recyclable. All these things people can directly connect to and understand. That understanding can help us provide motivation for specific actions, like appropriately recycling old phones. The people creating the stories have to know why it matters so they can impart that to the audience. And so our storytelling section uses that to then give resources for crafting effective stories, such as character development, plot structure. And our process is one that's structured around feedback loops. We, learned some of the issues related to the environmental impact of modern computing. We came up with some story ideas that we then got feedback about from a computer science perspective. We revised, developed first script drafts. We did another feedback loop involving both the computer scientists and theater practitioners to further develop and hone the stories. And to give you a sense of what we created, I'll turn it over to Soroya.
Thank you, Dr. Stubbs. So now I'm going to talk about the 2 short films that we created. The students honed in on 2 topics in particular, both related to the most present computer in all of our lives, our cell phones. The first film I'm going to talk about centers on phone applications and sustainable choices made by the companies that own and run those applications, or lack thereof. And then the second short film addresses the environmental impacts of cell phones throughout their entire life cycle, from mining production to e-waste. Challenges to the work centered around finding balance between some potentially conflicting goals. We knew we wanted our films to be narrative driven, while at the same time communicating scientific concepts accurately. And another challenge to accuracy was the need to simplify these concepts, but they're pretty intricate. And finally, we did this during the COVID lockdown, so we were balancing issues of safety and comfort in order to complete the work while not spreading any disease. Because we were in lockdown, the majority of our work took place remotely. The only time we met in person was for filming. All of our script development was done online using Google Docs, which really does work well for collaboration through script writing. And here's a screenshot of a draft of the script on the top, and on the bottom is a draft of some sheet music. One of our films included some music, which I'll tell you more about in a minute. But first, I want to show you how we collaborated in Google Docs utilizing the comment feature. We're able to get instant feedback from our team. Here you can see our head writer interacting with our computer scientist and our theater practitioner. And that was a really great way for us to collaboratively work and stay safe. Okay, here's our first film, Application Idol, which is a singing contest where apps compete to win votes from you, the end user. And the theme of this episode is environmental impact. A fictional app called Noise Cloud is the first contestant. She is the blonde on the left. She sings a little ditty, goes something like this. Forget that renewable energy, because I'm the greatest music app you ever did see. So throw me your money, oh yeah. And then everyone boos. And then our next contestant, the young lady on the right, is a fictional app named Songify, and she sings, fossil fuels are a shame, renewables are great, and people are to blame for their lifeless fate. And then we cut to the end user who votes for Songify, of course, and deletes Noise Cloud from her phone. And now we'll show you a little clip of that. The sound, did you click share sound? Good job.
Okay.
Thank you both for coming this evening. Now I want to invite you, the audience, to vote for who you think should win the App Idol Season 55 finale.
I didn't realize Songify uses renewable energy to run their data centers, but Noise Cloud doesn't. I'm definitely voting for Songify.
And the winner is Songify!
So as you just saw,
Thank you both.
pause. As you just saw, our end user is motivated to take action by deleting the bad app and voting for the good app. And she feels good about doing it, which is exactly the type of behavior we want to inspire in our audience. Our second short film is titled Closet of Doom and was inspired by the idea that many of us, when we do get a new phone, we don't take our old phone to an e-waste recycle center, we just throw it in a drawer. So we expanded the idea of the drawer of doom to a whole closet of doom. Our main character, named Victoria, is a Veruca Salt from Willy Wonka type of character. She was born into wealth. She has a nanny, played by me in a wig, pictured here. And she goes through phones like they're candy. Any new phone that comes out, she immediately gets. But then her father's business gets into trouble and suddenly she doesn't have easy access to new devices. So when her current phone dies, she goes into the closet of doom where all her old phones have been stored, and she gets sucked into the closet and some of the phones come to life And we're going to skip this clip because we have one more clip to show you that's a little bit more informative since we're low on time. So the talking phones educate Victoria on the impacts of smartphones, starting with the harmful effects of mining, then to carbon emissions from cloud computing data centers, and lastly, the problem of e-waste. And now we will show you our final clip.
Okay, so I see how it affects the environment and others in different parts of the world, but what about me? I really just want a usable phone.
And that's what we want to give you. Take my hand and give me a second chance.
Huh?
Trust me, reboot me and I'm sure to be as good as new. Well, maybe not permanently, but at least a little bit longer.
Yes, and we can be put to good use.
Take us to an e-waste facility where we can either be reused or recycled so that the harmful chemicals inside us don't leach into our soil and groundwater.
Okay, good.
Okay, so
There you go.
So by the end of the video, as you saw, Victoria is motivated to reuse one of the phones in the closet and take the rest to the e-waste recycle center. And now I will hand this back to Dr. Porter to share a little bit about the educational videos we made as companion pieces to these films.
Thank you, Soroya. So in addition to the creative videos that were created, we also created these educational videos that went into a little bit more detail about exactly what was underpinning some of the science behind the videos. It took a pretty extensive revision process to develop the scripts, working with the theater professor on focusing on why it matters. For example, taking things like tons of CO2 and replacing them with more accessible ways of connecting that are less abstract. Once we developed that script, we had to perform it. The theater professor created a crash course on basic acting for the camera, focusing on things like posture, eye contact, hand gestures, emphasizing each line of the script, removing inappropriate pauses, ums, etc. Taken in total, audience engagement is really dependent on a high level of quality and delivery, and that's especially true today. And video sites like YouTube allow you to seamlessly branch and link to some of these supplemental videos as you're showing a creative video. So it's very easy to do. And we've shared the story in a couple different ways. On the left here, we have 2 talks that we gave at the Exploring Ethics Forum, focused on computer science and in general ethical topics. And so we looked at these 2 there. And then we have an education and outreach portal on our lab's website, which is a joint project between USD, UCSD, and USC. And you can link to that from there.
And so just to wrap up, we've shown you some examples of some of the products that we created, but remember, we're most interested in the process. And we want to share a method for creating stories because ultimately stories have the power to shape our understanding of the world and to spur action. Funding agencies like the NSF increasingly focus on broader impact, so interdisciplinary collaborations with an education and outreach focus can be particularly timely. This could work well in concert with the Dear Colleague letter for bringing sustainability into research more concertedly. Federal funding follows public support. So if we can collaboratively create new stories about climate and sustainability in regards to modern computing with participants both in and outside the field and reach the general public, we can help to inspire the next generation of research and developments in modern computing. Let's infuse sustainability into every aspect, from how we teach our students to our research priorities and into what we communicate via dynamic outreach efforts to the general public. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Oh, wow, we finished before noon. That's impressive. Should we stop share?
Hey, are there any questions from the audience? Yeah, there seems to be one from Colleen. Hi, Colleen, you can ask.
Hi, yeah, I can defer if anyone else has a question. I guess just a statement that, thank you for presenting, and it was, it's really important work because I remember teaching students, UC Santa Cruz did kind of like an Earth Day teach-in that some teachers opted into. And I had all seniors and absolutely none of them were aware of kind of the basics of, the fact that there is climate impact and, what their industry does, about it, if anything, and what options they might have. So, getting outgoing students aware that these issues even exist through watching videos, maybe mentioning it in class. It's a really important initiative. So thanks.
Thank you, Colleen. Actually, at UCSD, I've been teaching a course called The Environmental Impact of Modern Computing. And one of the students, who's a senior undergrad, said, until I read that course title, it never occurred to me that computing would have any environmental effect. So I know that's common.
Yeah, and I've been teaching both at the lower division and upper division because I'm trying to get first-year students started on this work early on so that they can do it and sustain it throughout their time and develop this kind of work. We're finding more and more with our theater students that they are really suffering from climate grief. They don't know what to do. So this project was a way to activate some of our students to make some positive impacts and to direct some of that and get out of that depression space into a creative space. So I think it's good for a lot of people to do this work.
Yeah, definitely.
Hi, there is another question I like. Sonia, you can ask question first. I will go later. Yeah.
Okay, fine. Hi, I'm Sonia Klingert from the University of Mannheim, and we are having a project called Renergetic, where we are trying to build urban energy islands. And there we also need to communicate what is going on and engage people. And we find that it is that there are two issues. One is really energy illiteracy. People don't really know anything about kilowatt hours, let alone what balancing supply and demand means, and so on and so forth. So we've tried to build up an interactive platform, and we really had to reduce complexity again and again, testing it with normal people. And yeah, this turned out to be a real issue. So I think that the work that you're doing here is really so important. I mean, that's it. If we don't succeed in communicating what we are doing, we can stop doing it, actually.
Thank you.
Yeah, so my question basically, Sonia took words, like basically stole my words, but my question is about this, like you demonstrated that even communicating some of the very well-known topics of e-waste and maybe like computing and applications, like how challenging that can be. But as we saw in different talks, like in this workshop, we had very different talks on very different topics about energy systems and test beds and demand response and all of those things. They are even harder to communicate even within like the science community, let alone general public. So how do you envision that, like those kind of topics, even though they may not be directly working on, say, carbon reductions or waste reductions and things like that, but they are equally important because they are talking about energy efficiency and reliability and sustainability in like slightly different terms. How do you think they can be enabled to like communicate their work in a more effective way?
Well, I think identifying specific audiences is really important to that, because when you are, what you're talking about is when you're talking in a subfield, it's really easy to use the shared knowledge base. And as soon as you move outside of that subfield, that's when you start to get into that issue of complexity or having to translate the information. And if you get even further to the general public, where there's not even a sense of, I think the mention of not even knowing the kilowatt hours. So I think it's whenever you tell a story, knowing your audience and crafting that to know what is needed by that audience to have to go on that journey with you, and augmenting and shifting the story so that it, in any case, it has a solutions-based approach, but who is the audience depends on what kinds of action they can take. So I thought this was a wonderful suggestion of that in the previous talk about recognizing what the city leaders need and want, like that headline, knowing that that's what they want, you can actually then craft the story to meet those needs and wants. And so ultimately that is important to do that because you want to all get together into the sustainability bandwagon. And that's what it's going to take to get people into that bandwagon is different. So the general public, you know, our Baruch Assault style figure was like, I just want the newest phone. And so so I think we've learned that we really need to have deep understanding of what all the stakeholders' motivations are and incorporate that into the crafting of the story, but almost narrow casting some of the stories so that they can have the biggest impact.
Thank you. It was really a nice talk, and thank you for.
Thank you so much.
I have one more question. Do you test your stories to check if people really understand them? Do you do testings? Yeah.
That's part of the feedback loop. So as we were doing the developmental process, we would bring it to, it was a, captive audience of some friends and family. We were in the COVID lockdown. So a lot of our partners became our, how does this sound to you kind of thing. And our friend groups. And so that story creation process, the reflection and evaluation is also where this is a community theater model ultimately, and that requires that you don't stop, you continue to have the dialogue and you embed what you've learned into the next phase. And so one of the things that we had found was really challenging was to think about what's the solution-based, action-oriented approach for cloud computing databases. What do you do about that? Well, one of the things that's interesting is even to know that there are different energy sources for databases and to ask for those and to have a kind of consumer demand for those is an area where the next phase of the project, when I'm working with the first year students, I'm basically going to be challenging them to come up with ways to increase consumer demand for clean energy sources and databases and see what they do. And that's going to be really exciting because I also want to have them think about social media platforms as a medium for that.
Okay, thank you.